I've always been the kind of person who keeps to themselves. I'm not a loud neighbor. I don't throw parties. I don't complain about barking dogs. And I honestly don't care what color someone paints their house. All I ever wanted was a quiet life, a clean yard, and enough peace to water my plants without drama. When I bought this house, I didn't even think much about the fact that it was in an HOA neighborhood. I'd heard stories, sure. People complaining about letters for tiny things, nosy neighbors spying through blinds. But I figured those were just exaggerated. How bad could it be, right? At first, everything seemed fine. My neighbors waved when they passed by. People smiled. Some even offered cookies. It felt like a community. I liked it. My little garden in the front yard became my favorite place. I'm not some master gardener, but I loved how peaceful it felt out there. Just me, some green plants, flowers I barely knew the names of, and the quiet sound of water flowing from the hose. Simple things. The kind of stuff that helps you breathe a little easier after a long day. The hose. Funny how something so ordinary could become the center of chaos. It was just a basic green garden hose. I bought it myself, connected it near my garage, and used it pretty much every day. I even wrapped it neatly after I used it. It was mine, no doubt about it. But then, things started feeling off. The first time it happened, I didn't even notice. One day, I walked outside, and the hose wasn't where I left it. It was uncoiled across the yard, still dripping. I paused, stared at it, thought maybe I'd forgotten to wrap it back up. It was weird, but I shrugged it off. Everyone forgets stuff, right? A couple of days later, it happened again. This time, I was sure. I remembered using it in the morning, coiling it back up, putting it on the hook by the wall. But that afternoon, I found it stretched out across the lawn. Wet, messy, and definitely not how I left it. My stomach did a little flip. Okay, so maybe a neighbor borrowed it? That felt a little strange, though. Who just walks onto someone's property and uses their hose without asking? Still, I tried not to jump to conclusions. I convinced myself it must be a one-time thing. Maybe a kid accidentally used it. Maybe someone was helping water a thirsty plant and thought I wouldn't mind. But it didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. Day after day, I'd walk out to find the hose moved, uncoiled, soaking wet. Sometimes it was on my lawn. Other times, it trailed off down the sidewalk. Once, I found it lying halfway into the neighbor's yard. That's when I started paying attention. I began checking it more often. Morning, noon, evening. Every time I thought it was in place, I'd come back later and find it somewhere else. It was like someone was taunting me. And then I caught her. It was around 3 p.m. on a Thursday. I'd taken the day off work to handle some stuff at home. I was sitting in my living room, drinking coffee, when I noticed movement through the window. There she was, a woman in her 50s, short blonde hair, sunglasses perched high on her head like a crown. She walked confidently across my front lawn, reached down, grabbed my hose, and turned it on like it was hers. I froze. For a second, I didn't even believe what I was seeing. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She just walked up and took it. I opened the door, stepped out, and said, "Excuse me?" She looked up like I was the one interrupting her. "Oh, hi," she said in this cheerful, fake sweet voice. "I just needed to water my roses. You don't mind, do you?" I stood there for a second, stunned. Actually, yeah, I do mind. That's my hose. You can't just come onto my property and use it without asking. Her smile dropped like a mask slipping. "Well, this is a shared community," she snapped. "Front yards are technically HOA property. We all contribute. So technically, that hose isn't just yours." I blinked. I couldn't believe it. I bought that hose with my own money. It's connected to my water line. You're using my water. She rolled her eyes, muttered something about how I needed to relax, then dropped the hose like it was trash and walked off. I stood there, heart racing, angry and confused. Who does that? Who walks onto someone's lawn and acts like they own the place? That was the moment I knew I wasn't just imagining things. It wasn't random. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This woman, my neighbor, felt entitled to use my stuff because she believed she had the right. I later found out from another neighbor that her name was Diane, but people around here just called her Karen. Fitting. The next day, I filed a small complaint with the HOA, hoping they'd handle it. After all, isn't that what HOAs are for? To deal with neighbor issues like this? Apparently not. I got a response 2 days later. A bland, copy-pasted email that said something about communal property expectations and encouraging positive neighbor interactions. In short, they weren't going to do anything. Worse, I started noticing looks from her. Glares, actually. Whenever I stepped outside, there she was, standing across her yard, arms crossed, sunglasses on, staring. Not a word. Just watching. Waiting. The hose wasn't safe anymore. She started using it more. Sometimes even when I was home, she didn't care. It was like she wanted me to see her, like she was proving a point. I began to feel anxious every time I looked outside. What if she was out there again? What if she came back while I wasn't home and just left it running? I tried locking up the hose. I bought a reel with a cover and a small padlock. Thought that would stop her. 2 days later, I found the cover broken and the hose lying across her yard. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in a loud, angry way. Not in a throw-a-fit kind of way. It was quiet, cold, focused. She wanted to play games? Fine, I could play it too. I didn't know what kind of person could break someone's lock and act like it was nothing. I mean, who does that? Who sees a lock and thinks, oh well, not my problem, and just smashes it open. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That wasn't a friendly neighbor borrowing a cup of sugar. That was bold. It was shameless. And she didn't even try to hide it. I stood there the next morning, staring at the broken cover on the hose reel. The padlock was gone, snapped right off like it meant nothing. The plastic lid was cracked, slightly bent at the hinge. The hose was gone, and from a trail of wetness leading across my driveway and over the grass, I didn't need to guess where it had gone. I didn't even need to knock. She was already standing outside her garage, watering her front lawn like she just picked it up from a store shelf. Like she didn't just vandalize my property the night before. She didn't look at me. Not a single glance. Just stood there, one hand on her hip, the other holding my hose, spraying her roses like she owned the world. I walked over. I didn't even say anything. I just stared. Finally, she turned her head and without skipping a beat, said, "Good morning. Looks like you forgot to lock your hose again." My mouth dropped open. She said it like a joke, like it was funny, like I should laugh. "I did lock it," I said. My voice was low, controlled, but my hands were shaking. "You broke it." She raised her eyebrows, looked right at me, and smiled. "Well, if you leave things out in the open, people are going to use them. Maybe don't be so selfish." Selfish. That word bounced around in my head for hours after that. Me? Selfish. For protecting my own property? For not wanting a neighbor to sneak around my yard, break things, and use my water like it was hers? It wasn't just annoying anymore. It was personal. That night, I sent another message to the HOA. A much longer one. I included photos this time. Pictures of the cracked reel, the missing padlock, and even one of her using the hose taken from a distance. I was polite but direct. This wasn't just a neighborly disagreement. It was damage, trespassing, theft. 2 days later, I got the response. It was shorter than before. Cold. No empathy. No apology. They said they'd investigated and found no clear violation of HOA rules. They encouraged peaceful communication and suggested I resolve the issue amicably. Amicably? With someone who smirks while destroying my stuff? And then came the cherry on top. A letter arrived in the mail the following week. Not from her, but from the HOA. A violation notice. For me, apparently. Someone had reported me for creating a hostile environment and using recording devices to surveil neighbors without consent. That picture I took? They claimed it violated HOA guidelines. I was warned, told to de-escalate the situation and foster community harmony. I laughed when I read it. Then I nearly cried. It felt like a slap to the face. So, let me get this straight. She breaks my property. She steals my water. She comes onto my lawn without permission, and I get the warning. I started to wonder if she had friends on the board. Maybe she knew someone. Maybe that's why they backed her up so quickly. I didn't know what to do anymore. I felt trapped. I couldn't even protect something as simple as a garden hose without getting in trouble. I began avoiding the front yard altogether. I started watering at night when no one was around. I even considered moving the spigot to backyard, but it would have been expensive, and honestly, I felt like I shouldn't have to do all that just to stop someone from stealing water. And she just kept going. Sometimes I'd catch her outside, hosing down her driveway for no reason, just spraying water, looking over her shoulder at my house. I swear, she did it just to get under my skin. Other neighbors noticed too. One or two even came up to me quietly, telling me they'd had similar run-ins with her. One guy said she left a passive-aggressive note on his door because he didn't mow his lawn for 2 weeks. Another said she once threatened to call the HOA because his kid's bike was left near the sidewalk. So it wasn't just me, but no one wanted to get involved. They all said the same thing: don't poke the bear. I tried confronting her one more time. Calmly, I walked over and said, "Look, I don't want to fight. Just stop using my hose. That's all I'm asking." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, honey," she said in that mocking voice. "You'll get used to it. This is how things work around here. Maybe try being a little more neighborly." That word again. Neighborly. I couldn't sleep that night. My thoughts were spinning. Angry. Exhausted. I kept playing conversations over my head, wondering what I could have said differently, wondering if I should give up, let her win. But I couldn't do that. I wasn't raised that way. She wanted to make me feel helpless, powerless, like I didn't belong in my own space. And the worst part? She was enjoying it. Every time she sprayed her lawn with my hose, it was like she was grinning on the inside. So I started thinking differently. If talking didn't work, if the HOA wouldn't help, if locking it wasn't enough, maybe it was time to change the rules of the game. I started reading, researching, watching videos, looking for ways to protect my property without technically breaking any rules. And slowly, piece by piece, an idea began to form. At first, it sounded ridiculous, like something you'd see in a prank video. But the more I thought about it, the more perfect it became. Not illegal, not dangerous, just poetic. I made a list, bought a few parts, watched a couple of tutorials online. It wasn't easy. I'm not exactly a handyman, but I had enough determination to figure it out. The hardest part was finding the right tank, not a full septic one. That would have been dangerous. And honestly, I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I just needed something that smelled bad enough to make a point. Something harmless, but disgusting. And I found it. Old gray water storage, used for cleaning runoff. Still had some residual junk in it from a cleaning project last year. Not toxic, not illegal. But the smell? Oh, it was bad. Like old mop water mixed with mildew and regret. I connected it to the hose line. Rigged it in a way that, from the outside, looked totally normal. You'd never know anything had changed unless you actually turned the water on. Then I waited, and waited. The next morning, she didn't come. The next afternoon, still nothing. I thought maybe she'd finally backed off. Maybe she got bored. Or maybe someone told her I was serious. But then, around 11 a.m. on Saturday, I looked out the window, and there she was, strutting across my lawn, sunglasses on, hose in hand. I leaned against the doorframe and watched. She turned the nozzle, and within seconds, her face twisted. She jerked the hose away, looked down at her now-stained white sandals, and let out the loudest, most disgusted screech I've ever heard. She didn't scream like she was hurt. It was worse. She screamed like a rich lady who just had her world flipped upside down. Her arms flailed. She dropped the hose like it had just turned into a snake. The spray kept going for a second, soaking the corner of her lawn, and she stumbled backward like the grass had betrayed her. I watched from my window, biting my tongue to keep from laughing out loud. She was wiping at her hands, gagging dramatically, staring at the hose like it had attacked her. Then she stomped away, straight back to her house, looking furious, disgusted, and maybe just a little panicked. I didn't move, didn't say a word, just watched the whole thing unfold, my heart pounding with a strange mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. It had worked. The plan had worked. And the best part? I hadn't even broken a rule. I waited for the fallout. And oh, it came. She was back 5 minutes later. Different outfit, rubber gloves on, and carrying a plastic grocery bag. She walked up to my hose like it owed her money, wrapped in the bag like it was nuclear waste, and stormed back toward her side of the yard. That's when I stepped outside. "Hey there," I called, as casually as I could. She froze mid-step. I could see her shoulders tense. She turned around slowly, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your hose," she said, holding the bag up with 2 fingers like it was toxic, "is disgusting." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, is it? That's strange. It works perfectly fine when I use it." She narrowed her eyes. "You did something to it." I shrugged. "It's my hose, on my property, connected to my system. What I do with it is my business, right?" She stared at me, probably running through every possible comeback in her head. But she had nothing. She couldn't say I'd broken any rule. I hadn't touched her property. I hadn't even accused her of anything. All I did was smile. "I'm reporting this," she snapped. "Be my guest." I replied, still smiling. "I'll be happy to explain how it's never been your hose to use in the first place." She stormed off without another word. Later that day, I noticed the hose still sitting in her driveway. She hadn't even bothered to coil it back, just dropped it like it was cursed. I left it there. By the next morning, it had been kicked halfway into the street. I waited until late in the evening, then walked over, picked it up, and brought it back home, still wrapped in her grocery bag. I didn't even bother unwrapping it. I just tossed the whole thing into the bin. After that day, everything changed. She didn't come near my yard again. Not once. No more stealing water. No more smug glances. No more neighborly conversations. She avoided eye contact completely. It was like I didn't exist anymore. And honestly, it was beautiful. But of course, people like her never go down without trying to take someone else with them. The next HOA meeting was interesting. I didn't usually attend those things. They were always boring and filled with too many rules about grass height and mailbox paint colors. But this time I went, just in case. Sure enough, she brought it up, not by name, of course. She was smarter than that. She couched it in gentle terms, talking about certain homeowners creating hostile and unsanitary situations. She asked if the board could investigate unusual alterations to water systems that might pose a community health risk. It was obvious who she meant. A few people in the room looked over at me. 1 or 2 even smiled. I just sat there, quiet, calm, letting her dig her own hole. When they finally asked if anyone had a response, I stood up. I didn't rant, didn't raise my voice. I just calmly explained that my hose had been repeatedly used without permission, that I had tried to secure it, file complaints, and resolve things politely, that I had simply made adjustments to my own property, using safe, non-toxic materials, for personal use only, and that, interestingly, the misuse had stopped shortly after. There was a pause in the room. One of the board members even nodded slightly, like he was tired of hearing her talk. That was it. She sat down, face stiff, and didn't say another word the rest of the meeting. Afterward, one of my neighbors, an older guy who usually kept to himself, walked over and patted me on the shoulder. "That was one hell of a move," he whispered. She had it coming. Word spread fast after that. People started knocking on my door. Quiet conversations. Soft laughs. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd had problems with her over the years. She'd filed complaints over trash cans left out 10 minutes too long, kids playing too loudly, someone's wind chimes being too musical. But no one had ever pushed back. And now she'd been outsmarted. People respected that. There's something incredibly satisfying about watching a bully get outplayed. Not with yelling or fighting, but with cleverness, with calm, with planning. And the best part? She knew exactly what had happened. Every time she walked past my yard, I saw the twitch in her jaw, the tightness in her step. She never looked directly at me again, never said another word. But I knew, she knew, and that was more satisfying than anything the HOA could have done. Of course, I still kept an eye on things, just in case she got any bright ideas. But after a few weeks of silence, I started to believe it was over. For the first time in months, I could walk outside, water my garden, and not feel like I was being watched. I could coil my new hose, the clean one, without worrying if someone was going to sneak over and use it when I wasn't looking. It was peace. Finally. But underneath that peace, there was still this quiet, burning pride. Not because I'd embarrassed her, not because I'd won, but because I'd stood up for myself in a way that didn't stoop to her level. She tried to control me. She tried to twist the rules. She tried to bully her way through the neighborhood like she owned it. But in the end, she got a front row seat to her own undoing. All because she couldn't keep her hands off a garden hose. I thought that was the end of it. Really, I did. For a while, everything was calm. Almost too calm. The kind of silence that makes you think the storm is over. But you still check the sky just in case. I was finally able to focus on things I hadn't touched in months. Trimming the bushes, repainting the porch rail, putting in a few solar lights along the walkway. My front yard felt like mine again. No uninvited footsteps. No mysteriously flattened grass. No wet trail running across the driveway. I'd walk outside in the morning, coffee in hand, breathing deep, and the air just felt different. But the thing about people like her, they don't go away quietly. She wasn't done. Not really. She was just regrouping. It started with little things. Subtle, passive moves. A glare here. A scoff there. She'd stand outside and talk to other neighbors in that overly loud voice, clearly meant for me to hear. I just think some people take things way too seriously, she said one morning, laughing with the lady from 2 doors down. I mean, it's a garden hose, not national security. Another day, I heard her mutter something about vindictive behavior and petty retaliation. She never said my name, never pointed fingers directly, but the jabs were obvious. I ignored them. Let her talk. Let her vent. I was past the point of being bothered. But what really got to me was how, slowly, she started working on other people. She knew she couldn't fight me head-on anymore. So instead, she went sideways. She started baking cookies and walking them over to houses she used to ignore. She offered to help the elderly guy on the corner with his recycling bins. She complimented a young mom's Halloween decorations in October, something she once called tacky. It was like she flipped a switch. Suddenly, she was Miss Friendly, Miss Helpful, Miss Everyone's Best Neighbor. And it worked. People have short memories when there's free dessert involved. Some of them began looking at me differently. Not everyone, just a few, the ones who didn't know the whole story. They smiled at her, waved more often, chatted with her while walking their dogs. And even though no one said it out loud, I could feel it, that subtle shift in the air. I started to wonder if I had gone too far. If maybe, just maybe, making the hose smell was a wrong move. Not because it was unfair, but because it gave her the chance to play the victim. People love a good comeback story. And she knew it. One evening, I got a letter in my mailbox. Not official. No envelope. Just a folded piece of lined paper with uneven handwriting. Some of us think you should try being nicer. Nobody likes drama. We're a community, not a battlefield. No signature. No return address. Just that one little dig. I read it twice, then a third time, and I sat down on the porch, staring at the fading sky, wondering how everything had gotten flipped around again. I had followed every rule. I had tried being polite. I had gone through the proper channels. But somehow, she was starting to look like the good guy again. That night, I didn't sleep much. The next morning, something strange happened. I was watering my plants. My new hose finally installed, bright blue and shiny, and I noticed a small puddle forming near the edge of the lawn. It was too far from the garden bed, too far from the sidewalk. Just odd. I walked over to check, and there it was, a small hole, freshly dug, barely noticeable unless you were standing right over it. It wasn't there the day before. I was sure of it. I crouched down and poked the soil with my fingers. Wet, but not from water. Sticky, greasy, a faint chemical smell, like oil mixed with something synthetic. I looked around. Nothing. No one outside. The street was quiet, but my gut twisted. It didn't feel like coincidence. I grabbed a garden trowel and dug a little deeper, just a few inches, and then I saw it, a soggy paper towel, soaked in something brownish, buried halfway beneath the grass. I stood there, silent, holding the edge of that disgusting rag in my glove, heart racing. Was it sabotage? A prank? A warning? I didn't know, but it didn't feel random. I threw the towel into a sealed trash bag, double knotting it, and dropped in the outdoor bin. Then I went inside, closed all the windows, and sat down to think. And that's when it clicked. The cameras. I had almost forgotten. Months back, after the first few incidents, I'd installed a motion-activated camera above the garage. Not to spy, just to be safe. I pulled up the app on my phone, scrolled through the feed, and there it was, barely visible, but enough to make my stomach turn. A figure, hood up, creeping across my lawn just after midnight. No sound, just that slow, deliberate movement. They knelt down near the spot I'd found the towel, spent maybe 30 seconds there, then disappeared back into the shadows. I couldn't see a face, but the posture, the shape, it looked familiar. It looked like her. I downloaded the clip, saved it to a backup drive. Then I called the non-emergency police line and reported what I'd found. I wasn't looking to press charges. I just wanted it logged, documented. The officer was polite, took my name, asked a few questions, said he'd swing by for a quick look. When he showed up later that afternoon, I showed him the towel, the hole, the footage. He didn't say much, just nodded, asked if I had problems with anyone. I told him carefully that there had been neighborly tension in the past. He wrote something down, and then he said, "If anything else happens, call us right away." I thanked him, watched him drive off, and I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself until then. This wasn't about a hose anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. This was about control, about someone who didn't like being told no, about someone who wanted to own more than just their own yard. And I had become a symbol of resistance. That scared her, so I stopped waiting. I printed out a few still frames from the camera footage, just enough to make it clear someone had been on my lawn. Then I left a copy in her mailbox. No note, no threat, just the image, a silent message. "I saw you." That same night, she knocked on my door for the first time in weeks. When I opened it, she stood there, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "What is this?" she asked, waving the printout. I looked at it, then looked back at her. "Footage from my security camera," I said. "Just thought you should know what it picked up." Her face went pale. For a split second, I saw something crack behind her eyes. "You're sick," she said, her voice shaking. "Obsessed." I shrugged. Funny, that's exactly how I felt for months. She didn't respond, just turned and walked away. And since that night, nothing. No notes, no holes, no trash, no drama, just silence. The kind that finally feels real.